Hi, Sachsenhausen. Polonia gwarna, parna, Germania richtig dicker Heil. Sachsenhausen. Wirtycie jak bambusik, trupie łebki to kaktusy heil. Es lebe kule to Kampf.
Welcome to Descendant Stuff, a podcast by and for the descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners, working together to uncover the unanswered questions of its history. Sachsenhausen was a Nazi concentration camp located in Oranienburg, Germany, used from 1936 through April 1945. It was used as a labor camp, with a network of subcamps and worksites around the region, as well as a prison camp, death camp, medical experimentation center, and SS training ground. It was also the administrative center for all Nazi concentration camps. We are Jakob, Kelsey, and Nicole, three descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners. Though our relatives were imprisoned for different reasons, we've discovered we have much in common. In each episode, we interview other descendants, researchers, and even survivors, sharing stories, memories, and research to build a clearer picture of the past, one that goes beyond the records. Through these conversations, we honor those who suffered and died at Sachsenhausen and strengthen our collective understanding of our own ancestors' experiences. We are here in Tower A at Sachsenhausen Museum and Memorial. We are here for the 81st commemoration of the liberation of Sachsenhausen concentration camp. I am here in Tower A with Dik de Boef from the Netherlands, and he's here to share his story with us. Welcome. Thank you so much for being willing to talk to us today.
Well, this is part of my life, to talk about the history and talk about, well, it is necessary for the future, that people know what has happened here, and hopefully it will help to blockade the history nowadays.
Yeah.
Since not an AFD, not an PVV in the Netherlands or Vlaams Belang in Belgium and so on, or Trump in the United States. So,
yeah. First of all, you are not a descendant, are you, of Sachsenhausen?
No. I am child of parents who are in the resistance. My mother, for instance, helped long before the Krieg, refugees from Germany across the border to the Netherlands, helped some people to go to Spain in the Civil War. There is one name survived, was Heinz Hoffmann, a former Minister of Defense in the GDR. And he brought also pamphlets who are printed in the Netherlands in German across the border for the German resistance.
But you have a connection to Sachsenhausen somehow.
Friends of mine, the model of Turm A downstairs is built by a friend of mine who survived Sachsenhausen.
A survivor?
Yeah,
so
survivor.
You did know people who survived here?
I know people who survived here, yeah.
And is that why you decided to get involved specifically with Sachsenhausen?
No,
okay.
That was just happened.
It just happened?
That just happened. But I am active in the Netherlands in the case of memorials, Second World War, since 1963.
Great.
So, and I am chair of a roof organization of former camps organization, resistance organizations in the Netherlands called Central Origin, Former Resistance and Victims.
And how are you connected through organizations to Sachsenhausen? You are involved in the International Sachsenhausen Committee, right?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. Well, the Central Organization, a member of the Central Organization was the Friends Organization of the Netherlands Sachsenhausen Committee, and they stopped and asked COVVS to make it possible to change from him to us.
Okay. So you were involved in the Friends of Sachsenhausen within the Netherlands.
Within the Netherlands,
and then moved into some connection to the International Sachsenhausen Committee. And a few years ago, you were the General Secretary.
Yes, I was.
And then you were...
President of
the whole International Sachsenhausen Committee.
The whole International Sachsenhausen Committee.
For how long?
For 4 years.
4 years. And currently?
And I am also a member of the Beirat from Stiftung Brandenburgische Gedenkstätte.
Okay. So. And you are currently, as of yesterday, voted into a new position?
Honorary President of
the International Sachsenhausen Committee. Can you tell me a little bit about the work of the ISK?
We try to connect the land organizations in that international committee, and we are supporting the Stiftung Brandenburgische Gedenkstätte and to preserve the history and to educate young people.
What drives you to continue doing this work? We've been doing it for decades now.
Yeah.
Yes, you said since the 1960s?
Since the 1960s. Well, I am a bit tired of, not tired. It is for me enough, but in German, responsibility as president of a chair, that is enough for me. But further on, I will do what I can to keep memory on.
And that's the reason that you're doing this work, is to keep the memory alive?
Yeah, alive. And I give also lessons in the Netherlands at schools about my personal history as child during the war and child of resistance parents.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? What do you know about your parents' resistance activities?
Not so much, because they were silent about what was happened during the war. But we brought up with the sentence, you can say all Germans are responsible for the Nazi regime, because the Germans put first the political opposite, communist, social democrat, and trade unions people into the concentration camps. So that you should keep alive and not a whole people. And then there was an anecdote, zag men dat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
anecdote.
Mm-hmm.
There was in 1943 a policeman in Arnhem, where we lived then, with a pamphlet in his hand, and he called door for door, have you this? That is illegal, you have to give it to me. But you could read it, what on it was. And it was Stalingrad is fallen, 43. In 88, my mother told me that she was on the stencil machine to copy it. So for my father, he was connecting men between the different groups of resistance in Gelderland and in Rotterdam. My younger brother was learning German, and my father was sick. He was ill. He lay on his bed, and my brother was rehearsal something in German. And my father came hoch, took the neck of my younger brother and kept him to strangle him.
Yeah.
And he called, now I have you, Moff. Mm-hmm. And Moff is a bit a birth name for German.
Mm. So those memories were very much alive and
nightmares
in him.
And
nightmares, yeah. I can relate, because I know that my grandfather in his old age, that was something that as he got older, got worse. Yeah. So, I can understand that. And so they really didn't want to talk about, even on that side of things, they weren't prisoners, they were resistance fighters, but it was still, that time was a chaotic and really tragic time for very many people. Yeah. You mentioned to me when we were talking before, something about when you walk through Tower A. Yeah. When you walk through the gates below where we're sitting right now. Yeah. Can you tell me that story again?
When I walk through the gate, I hear the voices of former inhabitants, Dutch inhabitants here in Sachsenhausen. I know a lot of them, before I was doing this, but I did something in remembrance and so on. And they told me a lot about what was happened here. But they all survived. And I told you about the model down.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit more about the Dutch prisoner group? Were they all resistance fighters? Were they political prisoners because of their party affiliations? What were the
maybe
different...
the combination, resistance fighters and political opposites from the Nazis. The men I know were mostly members of the Communist Party of the Netherlands, like my parents.
Do you know how many Dutch prisoners there were here in total?
5,000. And are killed 1,500.
5,000 total prisoners? And 1,500 of them, 1,500 were killed while they were here.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we have every year a commemoration in Vught. There was the only SS camp in the Netherlands. At the end of the war, the Allied forces, where you can hear them in Vught, then they transported the men to Sachsenhausen, the women to Ravensbrück in 3 or 4 trains.
We're sitting here in Tower A, in the room that was meant to control this entire camp with the machine gun. And it's a heavy kind of spot to be in. What does it feel to you to be in here, right, versus on the ground? Right now, from this perspective, when you can actually see the overview of the camp?
The first time I was here, it was terrible because that memory of Heinz was his name, and you could not talk with Heinz about trousers who are hanging on a chair, because then he saw people hanging here outside. And that makes emotional something.
You've been doing memorialization work, and your interest is in keeping this memory alive and keeping this history alive. Are you a historian?
No.
And so you're not a descendant, you're not a historian. What drives you to want to do that kind of work?
I think the history of the friends of my family, of my parents. There are 40 persons killed in camps and in the war. So, and therefore, it should never happen again.
That's right. And so even not being a descendant yourself, it's something that touched everyone.
Yeah.
That hit everyone in some way or another. So even if it wasn't your family, it's still just as tragic that there's family, friends, and people who you are working with, and especially in such large numbers.
There's a picture of a skirt that was a present for me as a child of 3 years old from friends of my parents, and both men and women are killed in Auschwitz. And I was in 1962 in Buchenwald, and I received a letter of my parents that hun best friend, for me, Uncle Wim, died in a week time after a flu, and his doctor had said he should have told about what was happened in Buchenwald, because he was there 4 years. And then I fell down at Buchenwald. I could not walk, and they brought me to the bus. So as a corpse.
You just lost strength.
Everything, it cost more than a week before I can again walk.
From hearing the story and the feelings of... Yeah.
So that is driving me.
Yeah. You had friends that survived this camp. You have friends that are still alive that are survivors?
No.
There
are no survivors anymore in the Netherlands.
No more Dutch survivors at all?
No.
So, as we lose survivors, right, we're 81 years past liberation. Most people who survived at that point were grown men. There were a few children, but mostly this was grown men. So they were already adults So you're talking,
Yeah.
most survivors are either near or over 100 that who are alive, and there's not very many. What, with the passing of survivors, without the voices of the survivors, what do you see as the future of this memorialization work and memory work?
Well, there are videos with survivors, but we have the obligation to tell what was happened here in the camp, what was happened during the war, and so we can pass them to the future, to the next generation.
And speaking of that next generation, what would you want to say to young descendants? What would you want them to know?
Keep alert. Keep alert. Learn of the history and don't take for granted anything in social media.
Social media is definitely not reality.
No.
It's...
Try to read a book about the history of the war, about the history of several camps, and accept that the Second World War was not only the Holocaust, it's more than that. There are resistance, there are Sinti Roma Jews, but also people called that time asocial homosexuals are killed here in Sachsenhausen especially. Yeah, you have to keep that in memory when you vote nowadays in Germany on the AfD, in the Netherlands on the Forum for Democracy.
Yeah.
And we have just had in the last month, the International Committees has gathered together in The Hague in an international conference. Remember the past, secure your future, and a call to action. And the call to action is make the big camps like Sachsenhausen UNESCO World Heritage.
Yeah.
And it was a very good conference.
I think that sounds like a good idea myself. Yeah, I think it's as an important part of history for sure. Yeah. A few days ago, I think was the first time that I ever saw you. We hadn't yet met formally, but I saw you. I noticed you because you're very well dressed. You carry yourself very, very with a presence and power. We saw you come on the bus. We went on a trip together to Bello Woods, Bellower Valdo.
Yeah.
And that was for the commemoration of the Death March. And you laid a wreath and you spoke briefly at that event. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were talking about? Because as I know that you're not a descendant, but you were alive during that time. You were a child, and even though you were a child, you were a witness to the time. What do you remember?
Personally, I told something about the child of 4 years old. We walked from Arnhem to Rotterdam, and from Rotterdam back to a village in the north part of Gelderland. And they shoot of us. We have seen dead horses and soldiers hanged on the trees above the bodies of the horses. It's so terrible. Though. You see horses, it's leg high, and these dead soldiers were, that recognized we later on, Italian soldiers. Before they were part of the Nazi regime. In that time, the Allies made the Italian free, and the Germans saw the Italian soldiers as deserters,
Yes.
and they hanged them. Simple like that. And I was as a child, and we don't know, not my brothers or sisters, or even not my mother knew, because my father took me with him to
interrogation
an interrogation by the Germans in the near Arnhem, airport Delen, and they hit him with an iron thing to his face that was broken, and after that there was small bombing, so we could fly away, and then we go back to the city, and the tramway was shooting down, so we could run out the flaming train. This is part of my history.
Yeah. And you
I
remember, you were 4 years old, but you remember this time.
I have pictures in my head from that time. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
Well, there was a bombing in Arnhem. That was not a German bombing, but that were the Allied bombing in February 1944. They bombed Nijmegen, Arnhem, Deventer, and Enschede. In Nijmegen, that bombing killed 600 people. In Arnhem, 57, but also our house. And I was laying down half a day on the ruin of that house.
As a child?
As a child, 4 years, almost 4 years.
These are examples of something that we just mentioned earlier, of the way that even if you weren't directly impacted in your family by a concentration camp, this was a time that was a chaotic and tragic time around Europe, and there was nobody that it didn't impact. And I think that's an important piece of history that a lot of people don't realize, like you said, is that it's not just about one thing. There were many different groups that were affected in a very negative way by the Nazi regime. Yeah.
And well, that's for me, but I believe, and that was also what I meant in Belo, traumatic experience that goes on your whole life.
Yeah.
Not for me, not only for me, but for everybody who lives that time.
And do you think that having been alive during that time as a child and having those memories in your head is part of what drives you to do this work?
Also, yeah. Because also my body gives some signs. It hurt, my arm hurts, then I am talking about the war.
Yeah.
So, and that arm was lying down during that bombing time, and good.
Yeah, and I know that
And I have a therapy from in 87, 88, with a narco analysis. So you sleep a few minutes, and then they think to something. At the end of that 1.5 years, the conclusion is I can not speak very loud, I cannot laughing very loud, and I can't cry. Never. So my tears come here, and then it's gone. Yeah. And I have to live with that.
Yeah, I know it's not an easy topic to talk about, but we appreciate that you would take the time to share this story with us and with others, because I think it's, like you said, it's important for us to know these different parts of it and be aware of kind of how deep that history ran.
What can happen again.
And what can happen again. You are correct.
In Belo, I told war is people's work, and we can also make another kind of to go out conflicts between nations.
Yeah. Thank you again. Thank you so much for being with us. Descendants Stuff podcast is produced by Jakob Feistauer, Kelsey Snook, and Nicole Wines, 3 descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners and co-creators of the Sachsenhausen Stuff project. The Descendant Stuff team would like to extend a special thank you to the team at Sachsenhausen Memorial and Museum, especially Dr. Astrid Lai and the members of the Educational Department's project, What Voice Do We Have?, as well as the Descendants Collective Voices of the Next Generation. The theme song, Heil Sachsenhausen, was written by Alexander Kulisiewicz while he was imprisoned at Sachsenhausen and performed by him after the war. It is used with permission from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Kulisiewicz collection. If you are a Sachsenhausen descendant who would like to share your story, please contact us through our website at www.sachsenhausen-stuff.com or use the Contact Us link in the show notes below.
Heil Sachsenhausen. A jak będę jutro wzdychał lewą nóżką, ci zawtikam. Heil, es lebe Gold, o Kampf.